Zombies. With many of the great cinematic depictions of zombies, there are many valuable moral takeaways that can be gleaned from them. Behind the gore and trauma of the best zombie flicks lies a kernel of knowledge for the viewer to reflect on. Though zombie films have been around since 1932, with the release of the classic White Zombie, it was the George Romero classics, Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, that became the gold standard, and really established the zombie film as legitimate, creatively viable canvases for cinematic artists. But what is a zombie? In the modern cultural zeitgeist, a zombie is often thought of as a reanimated corpse with an extreme hunger for human flesh, especially the cerebrum. But the concept of the zombie has been around for centuries, even dating back to the ancient Greeks. Archaeologists have excavated graves from this time period, where skeletons have been found to be buried under many heavy rocks, thought to keep the corpse from reanimating and returning to exact revenge.
No. Not that!
Alright, I made that last part up to sound dramatic, but the graves of rock are real. There are even references made in the Holy Bible. To quote from Isaiah 26:19, "Thy dead shall live, my dead bodies shall arise. Awake and sing, ye that dwell in the dust, for thy dew is as the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast forth the dead." Then we have Lollipop Chainsaw.
God Almighty, you know, rule of heaven and earth and every goddamn thing in between.
Okay, so zombies in games have been as stale as week-old cat piss for a long, long time. As much as I love, and I mean love, franchises like Resident Evil, Left 4 Dead, and Dead Rising, except you.
God damn it!
The genre has grown pretty tired after the saturation of shows like The Walking Dead, which depend on tedious shock value and corny water cooler moments.
Pocket sand! Yeah!
It takes something pretty out there and special for me to give a crap about zombie games anymore. Well, I present to you Pretty Out There and Special.
Welcome to my bedroom.
Lollipop Chainsaw was released in June 2012. The game begins with our leading lady, Juliet Starling, giving us some exposition while doing her morning stretches and showering. She also states very, very clearly that today is her 18th birthday. Let's get the obvious out of the way. This game, on the surface, is highly venereal. The main character is a smoking hot 18-year-old girl running around in a skimpy schoolgirl outfit, eating lollipops, the most penisy of all confections, and wielding as her primary weapon what amounts to a motorized phallus. Lollipop Chainsaw is a collaboration between Suda51, a prominent Japanese game developer, and James Gunn. That James Gunn. director of Guardians of the Galaxy, and writer of the 2004 Dawn of the Dead remake, a film I happen to love, by the way. Gunn co-wrote the script with Masahiro Yuki, while Suda51 co-directed the project with Tomo Ikeda. But make no mistake, this is most definitely a Suda51 game. In the Western world, most hardcore gamers would know Suda by way of his surrealistic art house game, Killer 7.
This is too easy.
This was Goichi Suda's first game, released outside of Japan, and unfortunately, kind of got lost in the shuffle of amazing games released in 2005, like Resident Evil 4, God of War, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, and NFL 2K6.
Oh, that's right.
It's a real shame too, because Killer 7 is really solid. Suda51 found more mainstream success with the action-adventure title No More Heroes, released in 2007, but Suda still wasn't being held in the same pantheon as some of his Japanese counterparts, like Hideo Kojima or Shinji Mikami. Lollipop Chainsaw continues along the lines of the surreal, over-the-top action and quirky story beats that Suda was becoming known for, but unfortunately, the overt sexuality associated with the game kind of unfairly hindered it. I used to work at GameStop around the time Lollipop Chainsaw was released, and many people I talked to about it didn't even want to try it because they said it looked kinda creepy. From my research, Suda wanted a fun, over-the-top hack-and-slash game in the spirit of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and High School of the Dead. Evidently, it was at the insistence of the publisher, Kadokawa Games, that the more hypersexual themes be implemented. For what it's worth, the sexuality in Lollipop Chainsaw is presented in a very tongue-in-cheek way. It's sexy and tantalizing, and I mean, come on, it is. But I never got a sinister, degrading vibe off of it. Juliet is a bit of a ditz, but she's not written as dumb, trashy, or loose. Unlike this.
Do you think Mr. Krabs ever does karate?
Jesus. Lollipop Chainsaw is not subtle in any way, clearly. But Juliet Starling is actually a badass chick, not some damsel in distress. She's optimistic, she's an athlete, she can speak Japanese, she loves her family, and when her town is under siege by the undead, she doesn't hesitate for a second to pull out her chainsaw, the one she keeps on hand for such an occasion, to protect it.
The hell? And on my birthday, too! Like we're not already late enough! Gross!
She's a strong female character that happens to have a nice butt and is having fun. A lady doesn't have to walk around a gray, blood-soaked world with the complexion of a gym sock to be strong.
That is possible, Anita.
Alright, enough of the sermon. Is the game worth playing? Based on everything I've read about this game, this is probably the most contentious topic. In Mitch Dyer's review on IGN, of course, he gave the game a 5 out of 10. In his review, he states, "If you asked 100 people what they loved most about Lollipop Chainsaw, you'd get 100 different answers, and exactly 0 of them would have anything to do with the part where you play it." Jesus Christ, Mitchell. Even for a verbose guy like myself, that was elaborate. Now, In fairness, everyone should be allowed to have their opinion on how fun a game is to play. It's pretty subjective. For instance, some people actually enjoyed the Star Wars Battlefront 2 campaign, which was about as exciting and predictable as a company-wide email. Some people are even proud of the work they've done on painfully mediocre video games, and that's cool, man. Alright, look, I'm done teasing the guy. Yes, guy, I've confirmed all pronouns. Mitch wasn't the only person that lambasted the gameplay of Lollipop Chainsaw, and again, everyone is entitled to their opinion until that gets outlawed. I'll be honest with you, I was deliberately shopping for a silly, bad game that I could goof on in between working on the Max Payne 2 review, so color me surprised. To preface this with quick context, I've put over 120 hours into Devil May Cry 3. I've beaten it on Dante Must Die mode, the American one, and I beat the original God of War on God difficulty. Suffice it to say, I really love third-person hack-and-slash games and appreciate those with deep, complex combat systems and punishing difficulty. Juliet is nothing like Kratos, and that's good. She has her pom-poms for stunning zombies and her trusty chainsaw for slicing them up. It's a basic weapon combo, and it gets the job done. She has a low attack for slashing crawling zombies, and a basic mid-high attack that deals killing blows. Okay, I have to admit, one big flaw that Lollipop Chainsaw suffers from is that the combos are unlocked way too slowly for such a short game. Near the very end, I had a fair chunk of the moves purchased, but it was clear that I would need to do a second run in New Game Plus to fully explore the breadth and depth of the basic combat system.
Looking good.
Yeah! Come and get me.
Speaking of Devil May Cry 3, that game is a shining example of how to pace the distribution of combos and power-ups in an action game, and Lollipop Chainsaw is nowhere near that.
Ass!
But I gotta say, it really didn't bother me that much. The enemies are mostly pretty mindless, they are zombies, and they don't require too many complex button combinations to put down. Quite frankly, I had fun just kind of shutting my brain off and bouncing around the screen, performing basic combos, and watching the spectacle. Like I just said, I love complex, deep, and difficult action games, Ninja Gaiden Black being another perfect example. But not every action game needs to be punishing and unforgiving to be valid as a good time. Plus, I really love the goofy stuff. If Juliet kills several enemies at once, or in very quick succession, she will get a special sparkle hunting reward, which nets you a lot of extra coinage that you can use at the local chop-to-shop stations to unlock additional combos, power-ups, and outfits. She also has a sparkle meter that builds up during combat, and when full, can be activated to unleash a super powerful status exactly like the Devil Trigger mode for Dante in Devil May Cry. Her chainsaw gleams with the colors of the rainbow, and this devastates even the heaviest of enemies easily. It's so fun to spark this up and let loose in a big crowd of zombies and just start racking up the sparkle hunt kills. Juliet also gets the chainsaw blaster, which is essentially a grenade launcher. It's fun to pepper enemies with it, and it is effective in combat, but it's mostly a gimmick weapon insofar as it's used for several quick reaction events and during some boss fights in order to progress. Then there's Nick.
Juliet!
the story, Juliet's boyfriend, Nick, gets bitten by a zombie when trying to protect her. Instead of letting him convert into the undead, Juliet uses her chainsaw to remove his head and casts a magic spell to preserve his life as such.
I love you too, baby!
This renders Nick as basically a keychain on Juliet's waist throughout the rest of the game. Not only is Nick's dialogue genuinely funny,
How am I still alive? How am I still talking without a fucking thorax?
but Juliet gets to use his dome for several ludicrous gameplay mechanics. I adore this stuff. It's so daffy and ridiculous. Juliet can purchase Nick tickets. No, really. That she can then use to play a sort of slot machine minigame, and whatever she lands on is a special Nick ability to use on the spot.
Nick toss! Totally! Ready?
There's Nick Toss, where Juliet swings his head around on a rainbow tether to waste zombies.
God, you're hot! God, you're hot! Nick popper!
You can also use his head like a pop gun with the Nick Popper. It's just as described. And I mean, look at this. This shit is bananas. B-A-N-A. There are so many ridiculous moments that had me smiling throughout. Like fighting a black metal Viking on a flying longship, battling a gigantic zombie chicken while tripping on mushrooms, and running down zombies in a combolizer while Dead or Alive pumps in the background.
Awesome! I don't know what's going on, but this is a blast! You ever had a...
Of course, there's the level where Juliet gets transported into a video game, where Juliet runs around avoiding a legally distinct Pac-Man while hunting for keys.
That dude would be scarier if he wasn't wearing a fez.
I also really like the variety of zombie aesthetics. To be fair, there are only a handful of true enemy types, and it's not super varied in that regard, but the style of each zombie is charming. Baseball players will wind up for pitches, footballers go for tackles, basketballers approach Juliet like they're guarding her, rockabilly zombies have hollow body guitars, and so on. It helps to make the encounters more visually diverse and appealing. In general, the visuals of Lollipop Chainsaw are pretty special. Running on the Unreal Engine 3, it's not mind-blowing on a technical level, but the style of this game won me over completely. And I am the last kind of dude to be into a quirky, cutesy, over-the-top aesthetic. But I just couldn't help but smile when I was dicing hordes of the undead while rainbows and sparkles were flying all over the screen. There are more than enough gore-fest zombie games with chunks of guts and shit flying everywhere. It's nice to have something different for a change. There's also a pretty prominent comic book motif. This theme helps to reinforce the absurdity of everything, assuring you that this is not meant to be taken seriously. Menus look like a panel straight from a comic book, and if you look carefully, you'll notice a very subtle filter over the screen that looks like the inky pointillism of a frame in a comic or graphic novel. This bubbly artistic flair extends to the in-game shop. Chop to Shop is where Juliet buys her upgrades, combos, music, and outfits. Again, it's just so whimsical and colorful, and the choice to play the Chordettes' Lollipop song while you browse is a stroke of genius.
So what are you gonna do now, Juliet?
Watch me, Nick!
What might put some people off is the abundance of QTEs, or QuickTime events. For those unfamiliar, a QTE is when a series of prompts pop up on screen and you smash the corresponding button on your controller. These were pretty big for many years after Resident Evil 4 and the first God of War featured them prominently, and they wore out their welcome pretty quickly. So if you want to try Lollipop Chainsaw, but you wrinkle your nose at the thought of having to do these, let me give you my 2 cents. The QTEs in Lollipop Chainsaw aren't half bad, and with Juliet being a cheerleader, they're thematically appropriate. For instance, when you pop Nick's head onto a reanimated corpse, you need to perform a QTE. While Nick is shambling along, Juliet is in the background, shaking her pom-poms and counting each successive button press in a happy cheer.
Nick's head's on a body and he's screaming.
I'm glad QuickTime events have mostly died out, and I really love that games like the recent Resident Evil 4 remaster got rid of them in favor of live gameplay. But they were fine in Lollipop Chainsaw. Boss fights are a real trip too. I had already mentioned the King of Viking Metal, but there are several other bosses, known as Dark Purveyors, based on many musical genre stereotypes that Juliet battles on her way to the final boss. They each have a few phases to finish, but none are particularly difficult. Mariska, the Queen of Psychedelia, is a pretty solid little arena battle with a cliché LSD vibe. Josie, the Master of Funk, is a colorful, if boring battle. That is, until you're on top of a UFO as it careens through space. One thing I like about all of the boss fights is that there aren't any infuriating, game-breaking moments that completely ruined any of them. Even in my beloved God of War, which is a nearly perfect video game, the multi-Kratos battle at the end of that game had me seething with anger back in the day. The fight against Lewis Legend in a gladiatorial arena is excellent, and I love his continually transforming motorbike for each phase of battle. The final confrontation against Killabilly is essentially a combination of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and Fat Elvis. It's not that great, as it's just slashing at his ghoulish hands while he throws cars at you and waves of generic zombie fodder, but it's appropriately epic in scale, and the finale is awesome and quite touching and emotional for such a ridiculous game. Although, it's far from the best Elvis in gaming history. You know who the fuck that is.
The thing of it is, we don't even know what his name was. All the posters just referred to him as the King.
If you've played Lollipop Chainsaw, you may have noticed I left out the first boss, Zed. I wanted to save this as it ties into a problem that I have with the game. As mentioned earlier, the cheeky sexuality is usually handled with a real wink and nod sensibility. And as funny as a lot of the dialogue can be, a lot of it is the cringiest shit you can imagine. The fight against Zed almost made me turn down my headphones completely, as the tone shifts from lighthearted and silly to just kind of weirdly abusive and bitter, and not in a relevant way to the story either.
Time to get hardcore, you zombie hunting slut! I love the smell of almost dead cheerleader in the morning. Welcome to Skullfuck Central! Vanilla slut! You think that hurts me? I just jizzed a little.
Jesus. It's not necessarily offensive so much as it's just corny shit clearly written by a dude in his mid-40s with a questionable sense of humor.
We have Juliet saying "what the dick" all the time.
What the dick is going on with all this crazy stuff?
This little catchphrase we created with
Jesus. It also doesn't help that the creepy lines were acted out by little Jimmy Urine from Mindless Self-Indulgence, who, according to an ongoing legal case, is supposedly a massive creep. All parties are innocent until proven guilty, so I'm not casting aspersions, and maybe it's just a witch hunt. But just search Jimmy Urine controversy and form your own opinion. Listening to the guy recite Zed's creepy dialogue makes it kinda too real. Thankfully, the rest of the game's flaws are mostly just minor nuisances and are much more forgivable. As cool as the arcade game section is at first, the games quickly, and I mean by the second one, become boring, and by the last one are downright annoying. Mercifully, they're short.
Juliet, baby, no.
had mentioned the slow drip of combos and the need for a second run of the game to experience everything on offer. Do I recommend you play through Lollipop Chainsaw? 100%, yeah. Will I play through it twice to unlock everything? No. As you can tell, I enjoyed Lollipop Chainsaw a lot more than I had expected to. But aside from the unlockable combos, some alternate outfits, a little bit of music, and the good ending that you can get from saving all of your classmates, I really feel like I got my money's worth in a single playthrough, and the combat system isn't deep or varied enough to warrant another run. Whereas Devil May Cry 3 had multiple combat proficiencies to master, Juliet's pom-poms and Saw are sort of a one-trick pony. Additionally, there are some pop culture references in the game that were already way out of date by 2012 when the game launched, much less in 2023. References to the TV show Punk'd, and a joke about MySpace hair. At least the voice acting overall is good, and is perfectly silly given the subject matter.
Don't think that me letting you in here is an invitation for any funny stuff. I mean, not that I have a problem with funny stuff.
Tara Strong, who voices Juliet Starling herself, is an accomplished actor. She's provided the voice for Bubbles on the Powerpuff Girls, Timmy Turner on Fairly OddParents, Dill Pickles in Rugrats, and many, many more. She does an outstanding job playing Juliet, and portrays her with the right amount of slightly ditzy and carefree, yet emotionally resilient. This is a character that deserves a lot more love, and would make a perfect addition to an all-star fighter like Smash Bros. However, Juliet's boyfriend, Nick Carlisle, steals the show.
Juliet? How do you know how to perform a magical ritual on my decapitated head?
There's some...
Michael Rosenbaum, who you may remember as Lex Luthor from Smallville, is clearly having the time of his life in this role. Nick has major issues being a disembodied head, and comments on the absurdity of what's happening around him at all times.
Zombies! Coming to kill us now!
I'm a zombie hunter.
What? Ah! Ah! Oh, fuck! Huh?
As I mentioned earlier, there are some genuinely funny lines of dialogue in the game, and most of them are from Nick. And in the end, the character has a surprisingly emotional payoff. There's a remaster of Lollipop Chainsaw coming out this year, and you'll get a chance to try it out for yourself if you wish. So I won't spoil the end of Nick's arc, but I will say that it had me genuinely laughing out loud. The rest of the cast does a fine job, and even the lovely Shawnee Smith lends her talents. Last but not least, and this was a most pleasant surprise, the soundtrack was composed primarily by Akira Yamaoka. If that doesn't ring a bell, this is the man who brought us the soundtracks to Silent Hill 1, 2, 3, and 4. He composed the goddamn song Room of Angel.
Shabbos, Shabbos!
The soundtrack in Lollipop Chainsaw isn't as amazing as all of that, but it does the job and it supports the frenzy around you at all times. It's not memorable, but I have no real complaints, and the licensed music is perfect.
More fucking shows.
Jesus Christ, I did not expect to write this much. I've been under the impression over the last 10 years that this game was awful as a result of a few reviews. When I bought it, I was fully expecting to make a silly video where I trashed it for being inferior. But after playing the game for myself and forming my own opinion, I can say that if you love hack and slash games, it might be worth at least one go-round. It's not perfect, it's not deep, but it entertained me almost the entire way through. It's a Suda 51 game, not necessarily because of the kooky shit, but because it's punk. It goes outside of the common tropes of its day. Remember, This is when every goddamn game was obsessed with being this edgy, super serious military shooter to leech off some of that sweet COD cash. Goichi Suda wanted to make something memorable. And although I'm not keen to play through it again anytime soon, Juliet and her keychain head boyfriend are nothing if not memorable. Which is a lot more than I can say for Gotham Knights anyway. Oh, the irony.
You serious?
Peace out. Way out.